Hungry Trilobyte podcast would like to start by acknowledging Soonercon. Join us for Oklahoma's premier pop culture convention. Soonercon returns June 20th through 22nd, 2025. This will be the 33rd year for Soonercon, and this year will bring even more cosplay, celebrity guests, kids' workshops, gaming, comic art, and after-hours events. Visit Soonercon.com for details. Back again, we have Jerry Carita. How have you been, buddy?
I'm good. How are you?
I am great. I want to let you know, last time we got together, we had a good chat about the comic book men and your latest projects, but today we get to celebrate the 200th episode of this show, and I got to say, I'm glad to have you back for that.
Oh, thanks, Aaron. I'm honored to be the guest. I can't wait to talk about it. So what's been? Let me ask you a question. I'm going to turn it around right away. Ready?
Sure.
Turn this right around. Turn the tables.
Mm-hmm.
What's been your favorite episode of your show so far? Like, who's the person you had the most fun talking to, or the best thing that's happened so far for you on the show?
Well, it's hard for me to talk about best guests because a lot of these guests are my personal friends, and some of whom go back many, many years. So for me to choose between them would be unfair. But I'm going to say, because I do want to answer your question, the thing that surprised me most, that moment where it's like, wow, did this really happen, was probably the episode with Billy Mays III.
Oh, wow.
Because it was started out just being a talk about the basics of, hey, I like comic books and you like comic books and you're a musician and I don't know squat about that. And within like a couple minutes, we started talking about loss and grief and dealing with, those emotions through just learning about the things that we were just talking about, the movies and the comics and the geeky stuff and how those things coincide. And that is why I like to do what I do. And to have that moment was really special.
That's great. That's a good answer. That's solid. I approve.
Thank you. So I want to talk about what you're doing these days, though. You've kept your hand in the fire. You were just starting out one of your first comic projects since doing Comic Book Men, and now you're talking about a new project that is Scott Snyder presents, excuse me, Tales from the CloakRoom.
Yeah. So when I first started doing all this, I was in Scott's class. He does a writing workshop through his Substack. It's actually, when will this like be out in the world?
I'd like it to be out in about 5 days.
Okay. So then when people see this, then it will have been a few days old. But Scott's he used to do a very regular monthly class with this big group of people through his Substack. It's like a writing workshop he does. And he's had to kind of go on hiatus because he's been reinventing Batman again, and and also like running the writers' room on an animated series for Amazon Prime, based on Witches, his series, his comic series. And so basically Scott runs this class. He's been going for a few years. He's done something like 20 or 30 classes now. He does it through the Substack. I'm a member. A couple of years ago, a group of kids in the class, I say kids, a lot of them are probably my age, but a group of people in the class got together and did an anthology. They wanted to kind of let people submit a story that was, tied to the class and tied to, anyway, so they did 18 stories. I think it was a pretty large trade paperback that they sold. They did a Kickstarter for it. They raised a decent amount of money. A year later, a completely different group of people in the class did the same exact thing. Both of those were called the Tales from the CloakRoom Volumes 1 and 2. Sorry, there's an ambulance driving by me right now. And then about a year and a half ago, my partner on this project and I, her name's Veronica Howell, we decided to take it over. We converted it into an issue-based ongoing anthology series. So instead of trying to get 18 groups of comics creators on one page at the same time, which seemed like a crazy thing to attempt, we have an ongoing thing. So we do every 3 to 4 months, there's a new issue. And there are between 6 and 8 new short stories in every issue. And so we've done 2 issues so far. The second issue was just printed actually and just arrived at my house, and I have to start shipping those now. And the third issue is the holiday issue, which is available right now. So we shortened the title. So it used to be Tales from the CloakRoom. We're just Scott Snyder Presents the CloakRoom. And this is our holiday issue. We've got, 2 Passover stories and I think 3 or 4 Christmas stories, a Halloween story. We slipped a birthday story in there. A lot of them are twisted and funny and kind of like fun takes on each of those things. Or it's like this huge like multicultural holiday celebration thing that we did. And it's coming out just in time for Scott is bringing the class back as of like this week. So it's really great. And anyway, that's it. I've had a really great time doing it, and it's one of the few things where I'm not one of the writers. I haven't created a story for the anthology yet. I probably will, but I haven't yet. It's a totally different part of my brain that I'm using though, working as an editor and a publisher. And I'm having a blast with it. It's really a lot of fun and very rewarding.
It's fun to think about for sure. I love anthology works in general. Anthology shows, and I love to pick up anthology magazines and just read different stories from different perspectives, especially new writers.
Right.
But it seems like that runs a little counter to what's popular and marketable right now in the world of giant cinematic universes and multi-year long story arcs and everything being big. It's hard to look at small fiction as being something that the public wants, but I think it is.
Yeah, and you know what? It's done very well. Like I said, the first two larger anthologies raised a really good amount of money. There were 18 stories in each of those. We only have 5 or 6, but our Kickstarter that's going right now is almost funded. We still have 2 weeks left to go. And we've raised between the 3 issues, we've raised something like $16,000 so far just through Kickstarter. So obviously there's an appetite out there for it, and I think everyone knows kind of how characters like Spider-Man and Thor, they all started out in, superhero anthology projects. The first appearance of Spider-Man isn't Spider-Man #1. It's Amazing Fantasy 15. He was in the 15th issue of an anthology, thing that was just kind of to introduce new superhero characters and kind of do one shots basically and see what stuck. And so I think that it's like it's also what's nice about Kickstarter is it's such an indie crowd. It's such like not a like they're looking for things that are less marketable wide. You know what I mean? Like no one's going to Kickstarter for things you can buy at your local comic shop. They're going to Kickstarter for things that you can't find in the comic shop, which is why like sexy titles do very well. But also things like this. Like I can't just go into a comic shop and try and sell this book. These are all completely unknown creators. Scott's name and his endorsement help, obviously, but it's not marketable in a traditional way. So on Kickstarter though, people like to support something that is untraditional. So there's definitely an audience for it. I think we're finding it through Kickstarter so far, and I hope to keep growing it.
If you've seen that many people respond to it, it's probably hard to say who it is or get specific. But if you have you had a bead on what type of people are looking at this and saying, yeah, I want to take a chance on that. Yeah, that sounds interesting to me because I have theories, but you're actually behind the keyboard, so I'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, I was when we first started doing this, I kind of thought in a worst case scenario that we would only get support from people in the class, and that those people would come back every new issue and buy a new issue. We would only get support from people who had been featured in previous issues or the earlier, volumes. And I couldn't be more wrong. We our first issue out, we did pretty well. I think we got up to almost 200 backers. The second issue, we hit the same number of backers, and Kickstarter gives you a lot of data, and so does BackerKit about who those people are, and a lot of them are super backers, which means that they are on Kickstarter frequently supporting up and coming projects and up and coming creators, and not just in comics but across Kickstarter. So a lot of them are super backers. A lot of them are first time backers. Like we always have tiers available where you can get all 3 issues and the older volumes, the larger trades. It's like 400 pages, and it's not inexpensive. You know what I mean? Like buying 400 pages of comics is not nothing. That's a commitment, and that's like an admirable level of support for people that you probably don't know. You can tell you do get like a certain amount of, you do a story by a certain person and like their family comes in and supports it, so you do get a certain amount of that. I'm not like my mom is like my number 2 all-time supporter, you know like
Mhm.
like I'm not in I understand that that's what's going on too, but every issue so far we've been at least 40% brand new people, brand new supporters. So it's not just the people in the class coming back over and over again. It's new people every time, and it's bringing newer people, I think, into comics. A lot of them are first time backers too. But for anything, the super backers on Kickstarter, I think they just like knowing that they're helping something get off the ground that otherwise wouldn't exist.
Sure. And I just have to think, based on what I've seen reading through the Kickstarter and looking at the promo videos and stuff like that, I spend a lot of time in cons, and I have a lot of respect for the people who are very small time self-taught artists who are trying to put out their first work. Love those people.
Oh yeah.
But what this class is are like the next step are the people that have taken the formal training, the formal education. They've made those networking, those networked activities there to meet the artists, connect them with the writers, to make kind of something that's a little bit more professional, a little bit more trained. The craft has been honed, but they're still very, very independent. And that's fascinating to me. And I think the people who are reaching out to that might be looking at it that way.
Yeah, and I mean, it definitely is. Like, it's not just people, making up a story and finding someone to draw it. Like, there definitely is. The people that we publish are the ones who are taking it seriously. So, we when we first opened up our submission portal, or whatever we're calling it, I think we got submissions within the first 2 weeks from 60 or more of the class, 60 more members of the class, with stories that were in various condition. Some were almost done. Some already had art. Some just had some character designs. Some were just a paragraph. Some was just it was a log line and a pitch page, and that's it. And or just an idea they had that they worked up to pitch us. But we met with the people whose stories we kind of thought were, clever or interesting or spoke to us in any way. And then we chose to work with the ones who were taking it the most seriously. If you're paying to be in Scott's class, some people do that just to listen to him talk about the process. He is a wealth of knowledge, and he's obviously been very successful, and people want to hear him talk about the people he was worked with and how to work with people and give tips and stuff like that. Just talk about it. But there's another level in the class of people who are listening in order to learn something and apply it to what they're trying to do. And so that's where we come in. There isn't really, like, I think Brian Michael Bendis has a class that's sort of similar to what Scott does, where it's a lecture series that he does on comics. I think he looks at some students' work and stuff like that. I know a couple of other creators that do similar things, but this is the only one that I know of that has a self-propelling, student-driven anthology project that functions as kind of like a PhD presentation for you. So if you're taking the class seriously, you're taking notes and you're learning and you're going from lesson to lesson, you can take what you learned and write a story, and we'll publish it. And I think that's the only class that sort of has that as this like autonomous, self-started feature. And it's very cool. And like, it is, a lot of people come to us with just the idea, and then Veronica and I are using people we've worked with before, professional artists who've been in comics at various levels for years, and we're pairing people up with writers, and we're pairing those artists up with writers and create and saying, like, okay, your story is a little bit more fun. I know like 3 people that kind of have an art style that's more fun and less dramatic, and they or yours is a little more scary. I know someone who does a lot of heavy inks, and there's a darker feel to it, and we kind of help them find the right artist to do the best version of their story that they have in their head. So there is sort of like, it is a little bit more professional, and it's a point of pride for me and Veronica that every issue so far and every story so far has turned out as well as they have.
Fantastic. I was kind of hoping to hear that. I think that's what we need more of in comic fandom, because I would never discourage somebody from just, if you love Marvel and DC and the heavy hitters, please buy as much of it as you want, support the industry, but
Right.
understand that there are people trying to get something new and fun out there now that also deserve your attention there. And this is kind of cool, because if these people are trying to break into a larger comic company, or they're trying to get a job somewhere, they can literally use this work as their resume.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, one of the stories in the first volume was nominated for an Eisner Award
Wow.
as a short story. That was the first group of people that did this, and they collectively, whatever they did together. I'm not positive how far along that story was when the editors came along, or if Jimmy just kind of was already close to finished with it. Um, but it's a story that Scott went over in class before it was fully published, and then it was published in the book, and it got an Eisner nomination. And it's like, so you can get your work published, and have this thing that you can point to and say, this is a series that has garnered at least one, Eisner nomination so far, and I got a story published in it, and that's a decent calling card, I think.
For sure. And it's a step beyond just having something that you published yourself, which no shade on that if that's the way your
No, of
story needs
course.
to be told. But I mean, to actually have a group of people collaborate with you and put out a more comprehensive work, and that reflects a lot of different voices. And I should say you're taking a lot of pride in making it a goal to make these inclusive voices that have a very diverse range of input there.
Yeah, we Veronica and I are always upset actually because there are so few like women, for example, in the class.
Mhm.
So there haven't over the course of the whole project. I think I don't know if there's been more than 3 or 4 stories that were written by women. But we do try to have a diversity in storytelling for sure. So we're not leaning into or away from superhero stories or horror stories or comedy. Like every issue has a little something for everybody, and a little kind of a twisted tale version of something you're probably familiar with. Um, we've been very good about not having, for example, 2 zombie stories in the same issue and things like that. Like we're not
Mhm.
just printing whatever's ready. We're thinking and we're curating it, and we're thinking like what's going to be fun together, so that someone can pick this up and go through a range of emotions and a range of be entertained in a range of ways.
Mhm. Um, how to ask this without delving too much into current events? When reading the submission guidelines of places like Asimov's and Clark's World and whatnot, they will often tend to say we don't want to have a rush of stories that are clearly ripped from the headlines today. Is that something you've had to deal with as well when viewing what stories should make the cut and whatnot?
Um, I don't think so. I think we've probably had 2 or 3 total stories pitched that were not, that were just like, here's an idea. Sometimes from people who pitched us 5 or 6 stories. So we just pick one that we prefer to do. But we've
Mhm.
had some that have been like kind of overtly political, and controversial, in a way that we weren't really interested. We don't want to be we don't want to be political. We want to be supportive of everybody equally. We don't want to be like, we don't want to make anyone feel alienated, but we also don't want to make anyone feel any more like we're picking a team on anything if we can avoid it. It's not what the thing is about, and I don't want to. I wouldn't want anything like that to distract from what we are trying to do, which is just help people make their stories come to life. So we've avoided it, but there was like one story that was like it came a little too close to some bad stuff that was going on, I think, in Europe at the time. We just were like, let's not really get into it.
That's just trying to bring that up because I really had to have sympathy for the people who are doing the editing part of these kinds of projects, knowing that all these people are submitting their works and not really getting the full picture, that there might be a lot of people submitting something very, very close, and your story might be worthy, but it's just compared to everything else, it doesn't shine.
Yeah, like we also, like, to be fair to everybody submitting stories to us and what we've chosen, and people we haven't chosen to work with yet, or stories we haven't chosen to publish yet, like it's subjective to some extent. We whatever jumps out at us based on our experiences, is different. And we've had stories that Veronica and I have disagreed on at first, and then we'll talk. And if we can't come to a consensus about it, we don't do it. Um, but there are some that they hit. She's a woman. She's in Canada. She's in a relationship with another woman. I'm a white dude from New York. I'm married to a woman. I have 3 kids. She doesn't have children. We have very different life experiences. and so different stories hit our ears differently. And sometimes it's just a gut feeling, like I don't really like this one, or we'll get two or three that are similar, and we'll just say like this one has a little extra something, or the creator seems to be a little more serious about getting to work on it, and response. Even sometimes it just comes down to like who responds to emails better. Like some people are not super communicative, and sometimes I'm not, and I get that. It's not.
Mhm.
I don't want to like throw. I shouldn't throw stones. Probably. I live in a very big glass house, but yeah, like we don't. I think I've answered that, right?
Yeah,
All right.
that's fair. That's fair.
I caught myself rambling there, and I was like, I don't need to. Yeah, good. I
But
think I got
you are the guest. It is your place to ramble.
it. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
That's not a problem at all. I mean, that's the fact is we want to talk about what's interesting you about this, and the fact that you found this and you joined this class yourself, you said.
Yeah, I joined. So my I got into comics for two reasons. One, I was working on Comic Book Man. I think I told you about that last time.
Yep.
And television producer. The other thing that happened around the same time is my cousin is a comics writer. My cousin is James Tynan, and he was just starting to write comics at the time. This is before Something Is Killing the Children, before he did Batman. He was just starting. He had Scott Snyder as a professor in college, as like a professor, like a writer or creative writing class. With just like 9 kids in the class. I think Scott was working on the manuscript that became American Vampire at the time. And James became the person he bounced ideas off of as the only comics lover in the class. And so they became friends. And James went to work at DC when Scott was there. Um, and, so I like more when Scott started doing this class, I wanted the experience basically that James got in college. I wanted to like, this is the guy who, talked everyone through Scott is very into story structure. He's very meticulous about it. He draws actual little story arcs on paper. And so, before I really even started creating my own comics, I got into the class, and I just wanted to like listen to him talk about it for a while. And listening to him talk about it, I realized a lot of the writing classes I took in college, a lot of the storytelling structure I use in reality TV production, it's the same thing. A story is a story is a story is a story. You know what I mean? You when you're writing a TV show, you're writing up to a commercial break and then you're doing a cliffhanger. When you're writing a comic book, you're writing to the end of the issue and looking for a cliffhanger, or you're looking for those page turn moments. Like there are little nuances to how you write the story, but the stories are the same. And a lot of the language Scott used to describe storytelling was the same thing I was already familiar with from screenwriting classes and television drama writing classes and from work, from 20 years of sitting in edit bays trying to make sense of a reality TV show. So I started taking the class unrelated to this, and I just and then I started working on my own projects because of the class.
So you got into this. I mean, you kind of hinted that last time that with the work on Comic Book Men, it didn't necessarily make you a comic fan, but it definitely poured a lot of gasoline on what was originally a very small spark.
Yeah, I would say I had read a handful of large, like I think I had read Watchmen
Mhm.
before I did Comic Book Man, and I think I had read, I don't remember why I did this one, but I read From Hell, like of all the books. Anyway, so I had a couple of like the larger, here's an entire mini series or a large series project. Um, and I had not really, otherwise I didn't have that thing when I was a kid where someone handed me a comic and my world opened up. It just never happened for me. My friends were all, I had a lot of like jock friends actually, and my geek thing when I was a kid was Star Trek, watching Star Trek with my mom. That was like Next Generation was my jam all the way
Mhm.
through, all the way through like until I was a teenager, and then the X Files and stuff like that, which was like Monster of the Week. So anyway, so I got into it when I started reading. When I was in the comic book shop for Comic Book Men all day, I started reading The Walking Dead. It was around and it was popular at the time. And so my first real comic book series was a black and white zombie story. It wasn't capes and tights. It wasn't Superman. It wasn't Spider Man. I didn't grow up with those superhero characters as big, important characters in my life, apart from Batman the Animated Series, which was separate. So
Mhm.
yeah, I got into it from an indie side, and I never really fully went superhero. Like I'll read superhero stories when I hear people tell me that they're great. I read everything my cousin wrote when he was at DC. I read Scott's whole run on the New 52. And once I knew I was going to do this, I went back and I did my homework. So I read Chris Claremont's whole run on the X-Men, which is a lot, but all the movies are based on it. So it was very familiar. Um, and I went back and read all of Frank Miller's Batman stuff. I read all of Jeff Loeb's Batman stuff. I went back and did my homework, but indie stuff has always been where I like, what I was in love with. It was the first thing I loved about comics was The Walking Dead. Um, so I've always kind of hewed back towards that kind of storytelling.
I mean, everything you're talking about, with the arguable exception of Batman the Animated Series, are stories and works where the characters are not safe. There is no formula. Everything is kind of designed to be a self-contained story where anything can happen. And
Yeah.
that's something that you tend to come into when I mean, you came into comics and this media as a teenager growing into an adult, watching the X-Files. Like, you would have the series regulars were safe, but that was about it. And you could maybe even off one of them if you did it the right way.
Yeah, and honestly, a lot of my favorite things that happen in all of my favorite TV shows are the moments where someone dies unexpectedly, and you have a moment of like, wait, what? Like, how?
Mhm.
You can't. What are you going to do without that guy? Um, I mean, the obvious example is early seasons of Game of Thrones as a TV series.
Mhm.
When they do the Red Wedding and they wipe out all the hero characters in the story, you're at home going like, who's left for me to like at this point?
Mhm.
But then the show reinvents itself and it refreshes the storytelling. And so I really enjoy that. I really enjoyed that about The Walking Dead. Like, you always kind of got the sense that the book wasn't going to keep going if Rick dropped dead, but everybody else was expendable. And you never knew. They would build someone up for a long time into someone very important, and you'd think like maybe this person can't go anywhere either, but then they would, and that happened on the TV show too. Um, but yeah, I love that. I love that kind of storytelling where anything can happen and no one is
Yeah, because you actually truly get invested in it when you don't have an end point that you know that everything's going to be reset or they have to come back for another season. You're going to get what you get.
right. I could do you watch Slow Horses?
No,
So Slow Horses, do you know what it is?
no.
It's such a good show. So Slow
Okay.
Horses, I think it's on Apple TV. They've done 3 or 4 seasons now. Gary Oldman plays this like grizzled old, like should be retired alcoholic MI5 agent, like a secret agent in England. And he's in charge of this group called Slough House. And the people who work there are the Slow Horses. These are people who have screwed up something within the Secret Service over there and they can't fire them. So they put them all in one building and they give them like menial work. Every
Hmm.
season, they end up in some central position to like thwart a bomb threat or like save some like horrible thing that's going to happen or a murder or something. And it's based on a series of novels, which are also really great. But every season, you think like it's this level. It's almost like a sitcom. They're hilarious, but every season, at some point, there's a minute where a character you've been falling in love with all season is killed every single year. Like one of
Wow.
the regulars drops dead every year. And there's really only 2 characters that are safe, that you think of like they don't the whole show is based around this dynamic. And maybe they'll one day kill them off, but it's great. It's like so good. It's so freeing. It's so like it just makes it's challenging for the writers. Like you write yourself into a corner when you spend all this time, and as a performer, as an actor, like you finally get the right actor in the right role and they're saying the words the right way and everyone loves them, and then you kill them. Like you have a gigantic hole in the middle of your project now, in the middle of your story that you need to fill. And I think challenging yourself as a writer doing stuff like that is like fantastic. And when people can do it and it's good, that's the best kind of storytelling. It's like the thing where something unexpected happens and the writer can bring you back and make you feel like it wasn't just a random murder or random thing. It was all part of a story they were telling. You know, that's
Yeah,
great stuff.
it sure is. I mean, a lot of the shows that I've enjoyed, and I want to say the comics too, but I tend to like a lot of comics that are more cyclical than I would prefer they be. But they have that case of where, you know, you have the story up to the point where this character was gone or was transformed or this child came along, and then everything afterward. And those
Right.
pivotal moments, when they work well, it's because again the story reinvents itself after that. You don't feel like you have to go back to the way things were before. You don't need
Have you
that dose again.
have you been reading the Absolute stuff in DC,
No,
Batman,
I
and
actually just picked them up, but I haven't gotten to them yet.
they're and I say this, I know, like, I have, I have a connection to Scott and everything, and I don't want to be like I'm just saying he's good because he's like he's the teacher in the class that I his name is on my
Mhm.
book and stuff. But he it's really kind of exciting in a way that I didn't think it would be, because it's like it challenges your idea of who you thought the superheroes were, because
Okay.
and when they do that, it's basically like you think of Batman, like, who's Batman? Most people will tell you, oh, he's a billionaire who goes out at night and fights crime, right? That's
Hmm.
like the crux of it. But,
Hmm.
like, is that really the most important thing that makes Batman Batman? It's like,
No.
what's really the most important thing? And there's other parts to it. And so he just leaned into those other parts and completely created a completely new Bruce Wayne. And so every time you meet a character that has a familiar name, like, they're going to be turned on their head, but you don't know if they're important anymore. Like, you kind of, in Batman, you always kind of knew, generally, like, people might die, but they're all going to come back. The Joker dies all the time, and then they never find a body, and he comes back. The next
Hmm.
creative team brings him back. Bruce dies and comes back. Bruce breaks his back and comes back. Like, none of these things are forever. They always can
Hmm.
bring them back. And in this absolute universe, you just don't know. You just don't know who's going to be the important characters anymore, and that's exciting to me. That's it. It's kind of like breathes new life into all these, like, very familiar, like you're saying, cyclical. These stories just get cyclical and they get
Hmm.
repetitive over the course of. We're coming up on like 100 years of Batman. Like, we're very close
Right.
to 100 years at this point.
Hmm.
It's going to get repetitive, and having it be okay. What's the actual heart of Batman? What makes Batman Batman? What makes Wonder Woman Wonder Woman? I haven't read Superman yet. I think it just came out this week, or it's coming out. It might be coming out tomorrow, actually. As of recording, I think it comes out tomorrow. Um, but I've heard a lot of really good things about that too. And it's just like taking these characters, and it's I've heard some people say it's like a what if, like just one little twist. It's really not. It's a completely different character that, it still represents the things that you love about Batman. It's just that the thing you thought was important isn't really important, it turns out.
You just got me really, really excited about reading these comics. I got to tell you that.
They're so good, man. And like I'm a big, the books I do read, the ones I do read when, like, in the superhero world, I tend to enjoy them. I'm reading a lot of the Ultimate books. I started. I'm behind on them all now, but I read the first couple of issues of Spider-Man. I really enjoyed that, and I think he's doing a great job with that. Um, but ultimately, that feels like a kind of a what if. And it's similar. They tried to make Spider-Man an adult, instead of he's starting with a teenager. Like, the Spider-Man fans are older now, so let's have a character who's an adult and has kids and has different issues and different problems to work out. But it's really like one twist. What if there were no superheroes until all these superheroes were 15 years older?
Hmm.
Um, and so, and it also has that kind of like monitor, anti-monitor, like that kind of a device where I feel like it's going to be undone one day. Whereas the absolute thing could easily be the Batman and Superman of an alternate universe. They could just one day decide it's Earth 57 or whatever. You know what I mean?
Sure.
They could do that, but it just feels like a completely different trajectory. Anyway, it's very good. It's really
Sure.
good. Batman is different from the Batman that you've known. He's still determined in fighting crime and relentless. And Wonder Woman is just a badass, like, all the way through. It's
Yeah.
great. It's really good.
I mean, when you have a character that is so popular, they're going to transcend generations. If you know that some people are going to grow old watching this character and then somebody else, their children are going to pick it up, you hit a problem, and that is that you have to either choose between letting the character grow with the generations or choosing to keep them as a period piece. And both choices have extreme consequences for the audience.
Yeah.
And we're all just trying to navigate that. And I'm not saying I think one answer is better than the other, but it's the price we pay for having characters that are just this popular.
So this is actually something. This is one of the reasons I like Scott's class, right?
Mhm.
One of the first things he talked about in the class was his run on Batman during the New 52 when he was doing the Court of Owls. And he said, they had just finished a run on Batman. I don't think he was writing it before. And Batman had just pulled off something and he was like at the top of his game. Like nothing could bring him down, right? And so he felt like, okay, I need to do something that what's nice about these characters, right? Even though the storytelling can be repetitive over the course of 100 years and it can be cyclical, is that you can superimpose on top of the scenario, on top of the characters, whatever new thing you think refreshes the story. So if you feel like Batman needs a challenge where we've everyone's gotten to know Gotham so well at this point. What if Gotham isn't what everyone thinks it is, and hence the Court of Owls? What if Gotham this whole time all the strings have been pulled for the whole time, and even Batman, the world's greatest detective, has has never heard of these people, has never heard of the Court of Owls and all that. And so, what if you throw something at the character? So if you think, well, this is going to get stale because Batman always solves the problem, what if Batman didn't even know there was a problem because he didn't know the Court of Owls existed? You can kind of throw a story at them. Like it's when people complain about like Spider-Man, that's fine, but Superman is a boring character because he's perfect and he's like a god basically. You can't really kill him. I always lose my mind because I'm
Yeah.
like I get it. I get what you're saying. Like maybe he's not in personal danger of dying all the time because he's a literal god. Totally, right? But that just means that as a storyteller, you have to make the audience, the readers, care about other stuff and then put Superman in positions where he can't be perfect, where he has to make a hard choice and then live with it. And
Mhm.
that's a captivating story. And so whenever people are like, what's he gonna do? Lose to Doomsday? Like, well, actually he did once, first of all.
Yeah.
but but like no, he doesn't have to though. If what if Doomsday is either going to kill Jimmy Olsen or Lois Lane, and he has to choose. He can't save them both. That's an impossible situation, and he's essentially letting someone die or something. You know what I mean? You have to put him in a situation where it's hard, and like it always drives me nuts about that like complaint that like Superman is an easy like a Anyway, you get it. You get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do. And I had to restrain myself, and I'm going to stop restraining myself now because I want to let you finish.
Go ahead.
But when you go this, like, I have this. Here's where I always come at from that, because Superman is one of my all-time favorite characters, and this is why. Because people talk about the cliche is that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And Superman is the character that turns that on its head.
Right.
Superman has as much power as a comic book can give him, but at every space, his power fantasy is to do as much good as possible and to help as many people as possible. That is what he chooses to do. And that is something people don't get. And the fact that people don't get that makes the story compelling.
Yep. Yep. And even his cover, like who he is as a cover
Mm-hmm.
story. Like characters have cover stories that, you know, like is Bruce or is Bruce Batman, right? So if Bruce is really Batman, if that's the real person and Bruce is the mask, the billionaire playboy is the mask, like what's the purpose of that character? It's just kind of a disguise. It's like no one would think the philandering like philanthropist no one would think that guy is Batman, so no one looks at him twice. Clark, like the unassuming, the way that like Chris Reeves played him in the movies and stuff, he's like unassuming and kind of nerdy and weak almost. But think about the thing that Superman chooses to do as his cover story. Even that is supposed to be a noble profession. Everyone's mad at journalists these days, but
Mm-hmm.
back in the day, they're the fourth estate. Like they're out looking for truth in the face of all kinds of speaking truth to power and doing all the right things always from a place of weakness, not from a place of strength. And he chooses a cover where he still is just doing the right thing, but with no powers. You know, it's a fascinating cover story. I always feel like Superman for him is the disguise. You know, like
Oh
Batman.
yeah. Mhm.
Batman is Batman. The Flash is the Flash, and the characters, the people, their alter egos and stuff are their disguises. But for Superman, to me, it's always been the other way around. Clark Kent is a nice, unassuming boy from the Midwest with like core, American like values and good values and stuff, and he's like that's the real guy.
Yeah.
And Superman is just the person who gets to be like the fantasy version that gets to make the good thing happen
Mhm.
when the reporter can't.
Yeah. Superman was the persona he made, and they kind of say this in some versions more than others, that he this was what protected his loved ones, that he could put on this costume and that would distract from who he really was. And and sometimes they would actually kind of say that when found that costume, he chose to dweeb out the Clark Kent character a little bit more. That's when the glasses came in. That's when he started slouching a little bit. But it was just kind of a deliberate choice to separate the two by the most subtle of means.
Yeah, I forget which movie it was. I think it was the. I've been annoyed by this a few times in Superman movies because I feel like the movies kind of get him wrong a lot too. But the Bryan Singer movie, the Superman
Hmm.
Returns movie,
Hmm.
and then the the later ones that Snyder did, like Man of Steel. I have been dying to see a movie that the way that focuses just a little bit on Superman, like Clark Kent, the intrepid reporter.
Hmm.
Like the movies since the first Chris Reeves movie, where he was always working on a real story and trying to do something good, and he made a very big point of it. I feel like it's always just some side thing that doesn't really matter. And I've just always wanted to like spend time watching him uncover something and using superpowers to like help it along.
Hmm.
But they never really explore that side of him, the human. They never really explore the side of him that's like the person trying to do a good thing for the world that he loves.
Yeah, Lois and Clark in the 90s with Dean Cain kind of came closest to that. And I think that really only happened because they had 22 episodes a year to work with. So they could flesh out the story more in a 90 or 120-minute movie. I feel like that's just not a priority. And I regret that as much as you do. I'm just saying I think
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you watch the Arrowverse version, the Superman and Lois? Do you watch that?
I love that show so
It's a great
much.
show. It's a great
Yeah.
show. I'm only don't tell me too much. I'm only like I started watching it and then I wanted to watch it with my kids, so I held off for a while. And then we've
Okay.
been in the middle of moving, so we haven't actually plugged our TVs back in about 3 months.
Hmm.
So I'm way behind. But every once in a while I'll catch a clip online, and I'm just like, Do you know what the actor's name is who plays him?
Tyler, I might say his name wrong. Hoken.
Okay, he's so good. And I remember I watched The Flash all the way through. I didn't actually watch Arrow all the way through, but I was really up on Supergirl up to a certain point. And when he started popping up on those shows every once in a while, I was always kind of like, that's not Superman. Like my first thought was like, that can't be the guy. When he first showed up as Clark Kent and like in Supergirl, I was like, he's not gonna, that can't be him. But he's grown on me, and he has like there's some earnestness or something about um yeah. I saw some scene today actually. I don't know why the algorithm that ruins our lives, why it showed it to me, but it was a scene where he's in a diner and he's Clark and someone shoots him, and then there's this long slow mo thing where he like decides to reveal himself to everybody
Hmm.
as Superman or something. And I was just like, it just was, I don't know what's going on. I have no context because I have only seen the first handful of episodes. This is like a more recent episode, probably season 4 or 5 or something like that. And I was just watching it and I was like, this is so good.
Oh,
I don't know what's going on. It's basically like watching a silent film, like one scene from a silent film with no context, but it was so good. Just every feeling and emotion in his eyes, like He felt bad for the guy that tried to shoot him. He felt something for everyone in the room. He was like watching the bullet come towards him. He had a whole thing with Lois, and it's all just here. It's all just the performance is so good. Anyway, so yeah, he's shot up the list of like my all-time favorite Superman.
I love that show for so many reasons. One, that it actually shows Lois as being vulnerable.
Yeah,
And no spoilers. I won't ruin anything for you. But like every other iteration, they will show her as being headstrong. They'll show her as being brash. Sometimes they'll show her as being just downright dippy, but they
yeah,
don't like to show her being vulnerable. And this show finds a way to make her, they show that side of her without taking away from her other qualities. And most of the time, people get frustrated with a show like a Superman because we've seen it all before. It
mm,
always lives in like the second act where, like we say, the characters are safe. But this feels like the third act. It feels like they're trying to wrap up they started out the show intending to wrap up a Superman story, and that is so refreshing.
yeah. I actually so they're wrapping it up. So it's
I,
done. The show's over.
I think this is the last season, the one that's playing right
Okay,
now.
that's
Yeah,
great. Yeah, and I'm for that. I feel like things shouldn't go on forever.
sure.
What's the line from Vision? A thing isn't beautiful because it lasts. A thing is beautiful. You know what he
Hmm.
says to. Anyway, sorry, wrong universe.
No, no, that's a,
But like I always, what you said about Lois is interesting. I have always had a problem, as like iconic as it is, as memorable as it was, with the Margot Kidder version of Lois from the old movies.
hmm.
I always felt like, why why does he love her? Why her? I don't get it. She seemed, I don't know, like singularly occupied with something, with like getting her name in print. Like
Hmm.
it never felt like she had a fully formed motivation for wanting to be a reporter or wanting to get these stories out there. That was endearing. I always found that version of the character to be like, well, she's just gonna get herself thrown off a building like an idiot. like why is he so in love with her? Like there's you know, it never made sense to me, apart from that she's Lois Lane and he's Superman and that has to happen. Like I get that.
Yeah.
But I always there have been so many other versions of the character that I've preferred. And yeah, I like her from the show, from Superman and Lois. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I Phyllis Coates, Noel Neal, I have a lot. They were the ones that would occasionally get a little in the dippy category, and I still love them with all my heart. But what was great about Margot Kidder, and I'm not disagreeing with anything you just said, by the way, um, is that when he took her flying that first time in that first movie, that was the first time you really saw him fall for her in a big way
Right.
on screen. That was new. That was taking it to a different level. And so for that reason alone, I love that scene and I love that movie because I mean, you could always see in the TV shows where it was like she was trying to figure out his identity, she was trying to make him fall for her, and he would just kind of look off in the background and laugh the way George Reeves always laughed. And then you saw Superman like this was the most human he'd ever seen been on screen.
Right. I actually I'm trying to think now through the various Lois Lanes there have been. I honestly, this is going to be a weird one, but I think Terry Hatcher was really great.
I'm a child of the 90s. I mean, I can't disagree with you there in a second. Okay. Yeah,
Like,
totally.
like in retrospect, obviously the show was pretty campy and it was sort of like a Beauty and the Beast kind of like it was a romance show. It
Hmm.
wasn't really like a superhero show. It was like a romance and workplace semi comedy. Like,
Hmm.
but she was really like good at her job and charming. And I felt like Margot Kidder was always a mess. And I feel like that's like a trope they have with professional women in a lot of stories where the female characters are always like really good at what they do, but everything else is a disaster. And you're just like, why? Like, why? like, why?
Yeah.
And Lois suffered from that. I think the Margot Kidder version felt like that to me. And to be fair, the movie is also 45 years old at this point.
That that is I made a comment not too long ago to somebody else that this was it, it's just unfortunate some of those things had to play out the way they did, because I love the movie for so many reasons,
Yeah,
and
it's a
just
great movie.
it's the context of the time just makes it. You just wish they hadn't played a couple things a couple ways, and that I just don't want to say anything more about that because it
I
takes it
mean,
off.
ultimately, nothing ages perfectly. You know what I mean?
Mhm,
So
sure, but to be fair, I want to make sure that people have a chance to check out Scott, the Cloakroom, Tales from the Cloakroom, and the rest
yes,
of your
please.
work. So where can we go ahead and send people to do that?
So I try to consolidate people now. I have a newsletter on Substack myself. It's jerrycarita.substack.com. But if you're looking for just to more casually follow, I don't send a lot of I'm not a spammer, so you'll get an email from me once every 2 weeks maybe. Um, and otherwise, everything I do is under the banner of Thorny Comics. So I'm Thorny Comics on Facebook. I'm at Thorny Comics on Instagram. I still have a Twitter account. I'm using it less and less. I've started to kind of look at Blue Sky a little bit more. So you can find me on the only Thorny Comics on Blue Sky. But that's it. It's Thorny Comics, or you can usually just find me by my name too.
I am just a recently become a Substack user. I do want to check out that email list, and I am a big advocate of Blue Sky, so I'm going to check out all that stuff, and I recommend other people do that too.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Sure, Jerry, I want to thank you so much for coming back. Thanks so much for the chat, and I would be glad to talk to you anytime.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate it, man.
Have a
Good
good
luck.
night.
Congratulations on 200.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You got it, buddy.